keeping geopolitical risks in mind during investment decisions, the shift in gravity of shipping markets eastwards, and how little shipping has changed in the last 25 years despite the revolution in technology. Welcome to the latest episode of Chat About Geopolitics and Trade with the Seatrade Maritime Podcast, hosted by Punit Oza, founder of MaritimeNXT. Today, Punit talks with Christoph Toepher of Borealis Maritime. Over to you, Punit.
Thank you so much, Marcus. It's amazing to be back on another episode of the Chat About Geopolitics and Trade podcast, what I call my Chat GPT. It's always an honor and a pleasure to welcome friends as well as people who have really exemplarily performed in this very intricate industry. And today, my guest is Christoph Toepher, CEO of Borealis Maritime. Welcome, Christoph, to the podcast.
Thank you, Punit. Great to be here, and great, as you say, connect with friends and old schoolmates. Actually,
Absolutely, we've known each other since we studied together in that time City University Business School, which is now CAS, and then Bayes Business School in the Masters in Shipping, Trade and Finance. So obviously, I had one of our other classmates, Stamatis, on the previous episode, and it's always great to have classmates on as well. The origin of this podcast, as I explained to you earlier, is that I genuinely teach this subject of geopolitical risks and impact on shipping and trade flows in various universities globally. And the reason why I've actually taken this on to impart this to the students is because I genuinely believe that this is a gap that exists. First of all, I believe that geopolitics, trade, and shipping are very closely linked to each other. So, what are your thoughts on this aspect? Do you actually see from your vast experience, your background has been shipowning, commodity trading side, and we'll come back to it, but even a little bit of dabble into digital space and ship desk many years ago. I would say, from the fact that you have this very wide experience, how have you seen geopolitics being in the center of trade and shipping discussions when it comes to actual industry related aspects that you have actually dealt with in your career? Maybe your thoughts on this to start with.
yeah, thank you, Punit. Obviously, geopolitics play a vast role in shipping, but they affect everyone in very different ways. The question is, are you an operator? Are you a ship owner? Are you a bank? And these geopolitical events that we have regularly occurring obviously affect everyone in a very, very different form. So you got to be prepared. You got to be conscious of these kind of events. But we also know that they have happened in the past. They will always happen in the future. Some of which we can maybe anticipate, predict. I wouldn't say we can't, but we can maybe anticipate some tension, and we need to be careful or mindful of it. And then there's other areas where we are completely blindsided and obviously have to then react in various different forms on these geopolitical events that do occur. So it's front and center, I would say, on your decision making. At the same time, you have to embed it with a lot of other considerations when you take exposure to the shipping market, in what form you may take the exposure.
Interesting. So, one of the things that obviously I try and explain to the students is that trade flows tend to kind of follow geopolitical changes as well. I mean, one of the most common examples is tariffs and barriers to trade, which obviously require economic decision making sometimes to relate to trade flow changes. But what is most interesting is for me is that while these geopolitical events are constantly being reported in all the financial newspapers and the various media outlets, trade and shipping is not really a discussion. I mean, US import tariffs on Chinese goods or Chinese retaliatory tariffs were of course front and center for every single newspaper when Trump did that. But at the end of the day, it concentrated on Trump and Xi Jinping, and it concentrated on the economic impact on some of the companies. But we also know from a shipping perspective that a lot of the grain movements shifted. Brazil and Argentina benefited from that, or even other movements changed in terms of economic thing. Why is it that trade and shipping doesn't really get the kind of room in these kind of discussions on geopolitics? Is it because the shipping industry is a bit of a sloth industry, a bit of an invisible contributor to the economy, while it is doing so much for the global space? it doesn't seem to get its due credit, especially when it comes to geopolitical impact. Would you tend to agree with that?
Yeah, I would very much agree with that. I think shipping in the general public is very much misunderstood and also not known to a large extent. So, we all fly in aircrafts, we all, know an Airbus, a Boeing, and those kind of things. And in shipping, we are dealing with some transportation system that generally is out of the sight for the public, general public. Of course, if you're in Hong Kong, Singapore, Hamburg, or Rotterdam, you see it, but the general public doesn't really have any touch points to the shipping markets. And so it's vastly misunderstood. It's vastly also misrepresented in the financial press, I would say. I totally agree. The tariffs that Trump introduced is a very good example of what happened and how it affected various shipping markets significantly, but it wasn't really reported. You had COVID, and also at the beginning, the shipping, everything stopped, all the ships stopped literally, but it wasn't really paid any attention to.
Hmm.
The attention only started when suddenly people said, why is my sofa that I ordered in China or wherever, that you probably don't even know that you ordered in China, but why is it delayed? And then you've asked the supplier and he says, well, the sofa is coming from China and there's some issues. And then what are issues? And so suddenly, the supply chain issues that came through COVID came to the forefront of people's mind, and people realized that there was actually a lot in the background. People don't understand that almost anything that they feel and touch on a daily basis or they buy has somewhat seen a vessel in its lifetime. It may be as a raw commodity, it may be as a finished product, but without the shipping industry in the background, the economy how we know it wouldn't function at all. But this is largely misunderstood. It's also when we speak to investors, and I come back later on maybe a little bit about how we look at shipping as a participant here in the market. Quite often when we talk to people who are looking to potentially deploy some capital in the shipping market, they generally have this perception of, oh, it's super volatile. They know the BDI because the BDI may be reported in the Financial Times. They have heard about freight rates, the container freight rate indexes or so, and this is sometimes picked up by the general media as well, Bloomberg or the FT, and they just see volatility all over the place, and they see like, oh my God, shipping is so volatile, and shipping is all about the BDI and all about the container freight rates, where there's so much more. But it's a difficult industry to understand. We all know it's very difficult for an outsider to understand what really happens. And so that's why there are very few journalists who actually really have a good grasp of the shipping market and therefore can explain it to the wider public. If events happen, if tariffs happen, how does it affect actually, other industries beyond just direct related, steel industry or whatever was targeted with these tariffs.
Absolutely. And I think that's a very valid point that you mentioned. I think on the investment side, you have actually had very rich experience in terms of being involved with somebody like Tufton Oceanic earlier, and now obviously your very successful partnership with KKR and with Borealis being a major investor. Plus, you've also had experience in all ocean in past. So, investment in maritime, investment in shipping, type of ships, sectoral investment, believing in kind of a specific market, looking at trends and working with the best options available is something that has very naturally come to you over the years, which is you've done it very successfully. So, congrats on that. My point is how much of that, where you saw geopolitics actually having either a conscious or an unconscious bias creeping in there. I mean, would you actually say some of the geopolitical events, whether it's demographic changes with regard to the kind of demand that the future demographic changes will bring, or maybe short term or even medium term changes because of, say, wars and other aspects that comes into play? Do you actually see investment decisions being affected by this geopolitical aspects coming into play, or do you think that in the market, in the long run, market will find its own ground and you are investing with that particular aspect, with geopolitics playing a minor role in that entire discussion? Or would you say it plays a fairly big role in the back of it? Yeah.
When we make investment decisions, we don't look at geopolitical events, how they can drive this investment decision. What we do keep in mind is that we have to anticipate during the investment period, during the time of life that the vessel is going to spend with us under ownership, that we will face geopolitical risk that we have to absorb and that we have to cater for. what they are and in which sector they're going to be effective, and or which sector they're going to be having the most effects on, that is obviously a question we cannot, in many cases, we cannot answer. But we just have to anticipate that there will be some events. And so when we look at investments, we look at it, where are we in the cycle? How robust is this investment? And I give some examples. You had obviously a period of time after the great financial crisis, where you had various segments in a very low cycle environment, but changing. The dry cargo was down, then it was up again, and then it went even further down in 2016. And you had other areas in shipping as well, the container market, tankers, etc., all being greatly affected. And so there were opportunities you could do where you could buy vessels at deep value, and you could take a view that actually, because your entry point was very, very good, you can absorb these shocks that will come. And rightly so. I mean, we invested quite heavily into the container market, and then we thought 2019, 2020 we would finally see a better market. And then first came the tariffs from Trump, and we had
Yep.
disruption to the container market from that. And then came COVID, and as just at the moment when we thought the market was on an upswing, came COVID, and it first gave us a knockdown. So you have to kind of anticipate things are going to come. Now we have a very different investment environment. The markets in general, all shipping markets are up, are significantly above historical means, and you have to therefore absorb these shocks that will come, in our view, in a different form. You have to invest much more conservatively. We secure much more forward cash flow, fixed charters, etc. So we don't go in speculatively, because we want to de-risk ourselves, not just the investment itself, but also absorb, or be able to absorb, geopolitical risks that will come and that will affect this investment. We know these geopolitical events happen, generally every 3 to 5 years, something happens. Now we had a very short time frames between some of the latest geopolitical events, from
Yes.
COVID
Correct.
to Ukraine to the Red Sea crisis now. So that has been like one after the other. But also we've had periods before where we had 5 years or so between some bigger events. So you just have to, in our view, when you invest, just have to keep in mind that you will find some, or should be prepared to have some wind blowing into your face at some stage of the investment, and make sure you can absorb this wind and you can actually use it for your advantage.
Absolutely. One of the other things which is obviously in a geopolitical arena is the fact that rather than being a bipolar world, which was predominantly U.S. Initially it was U.S. Russia, now it was U.S. China for a while, but we now see a kind of a multipolar world now. And what I mean by that is essentially there are pockets of opportunities which spring up. I know you're not much in the spot market, so obviously this is very relevant to people who are building markets as they go along. But because you have multipolar world today, you also have pockets of strength rather than opportunities itself, because countries like India and others are looking to build up bigger portfolios when it comes to maritime as well. Do you actually see that your counterparties or the mix of counterparties which you are looking to eye as long term partners is also changing because of geopolitical reasons? Has those alliances actually created new opportunities for you in terms of finding customers which otherwise you would probably not be looking at? Would you say that mix has changed over the years?
No, I wouldn't say necessarily. You have obviously generally had a shift over the last 20 years towards the east, in terms of activities on the maritime space. The US is kind of vastly gone, except on the oil
Right.
major side, maybe, and some of the grain houses. But otherwise, it doesn't play a role. For capital, it still plays a role. And so the shift of gravity for the shipping market has moved to the east. And that also means that some of our customers have moved to the east, and we may be having more activities these days in Asia. But by and large, these geopolitical events, I wouldn't say that they have a massive effect on the way that the charterers or the end user of our vessels have massively changed. It's interesting if you look at it on the container side. Still, the biggest container lines obviously are very much European. You have Costco, you have O&E, and then you have One High and some of the regional players. But still, by and large, the largest players are still European. So that hasn't really changed in that
Hmm.
space. And on the grain trade or on the oil trade side as well, you have the Vitols, Trafiguras, you have the Cargills, etc. So you have that hasn't really changed significantly. Yes, they have bigger offices these days in Asia than they had 20, 30 years ago, for sure. And some of the
Sure.
trades have moved, but I wouldn't say that the players themselves have all significantly changed.
Interesting. So obviously they are probably having greater activity in those areas of pockets of strength, but the players are still essentially the same who are from the past. So those relationships kind of continue to be quite robust in that sense. So that's interesting to know that, because I believe one of the challenges is the new blocks that are coming up, like the BRICS and BRICS Plus, which I find that when I talk to the students, they are actually fascinated by the idea that two of the countries are predominantly not looking to use US dollars. So they are obviously looking to kind of do more barter trades, and that creates a trade flow opportunity, which is interesting as well. But let me come to some very specific things with regard to what's happening now with Red Sea. And obviously, you have ships which are on long term charters to various customers as well. So the current aspects that you're doing it, you are obviously taking all the usual measures to make sure that safety and everything else is in place. But in general, do you actually see that with the heightened security challenges, you're also rerouting your ships and insisting that they go via the Cape of Good Hope, and the Red Sea is a no space at the moment for you?
Absolutely. We have institutional capital that is backing us on our investments. And so we have to keep in mind that this is not private capital where we can take certain views and say, look, I'm going to make X, Y, and Z money. And so we're just going to take the risk. And if it goes wrong, yeah, it's our own risk that we're taking. No, we do taking risk here for our investors and largely for investors. And so we have to be mindful of this. However, at the same time, when we started to invoke convor or other clauses and other means to try to prevent charterers from using our vessels in the Red Sea, we had quite a big pushback on this beginning from some charterers and calling us unreasonable and other things. We have had one vessel that we continue to allow going through the Red Sea. It was on a charter to an Italian charterer going from Italy, Turkey, and through the Red Sea to east of Africa, and that is obviously extremely difficult trade to reroute around the Cape of Good Hope. So we agreed
Sure.
with naval escort to allow this vessel to still go through. We had one successful voyage where nothing happened, and on the second voyage, we got shot at 4 times. One of the
Wow.
missiles landed about 100 meters in front of the vessel. Only one of the 4 missiles was intercepted by the frigate that was the escort, so it wasn't very effective. And
Wow.
we decided afterwards that this was the last time. We cannot take this risk anymore. Our investors obviously made sure also that we don't take this risk anymore. They were conscious, they were aware of this. We obviously had told them that this vessel was still going through, and we
Right.
decided afterwards that we cannot accept any more going through the Red Sea. So these kind of things, yeah, we are probably in general we're overly cautious. We also have been overly cautious not to trade Russia, even if it was sanction permitted cargo. We did not trade Russia, and we try to avoid some of these things that maybe as a private ship owner you can accept, or you can have to make your own conscious decision for yourselves. We have to be slightly more mindful of these kind of situations.
Absolutely. And safety comes first. And I fully appreciate your sharing here. Um, Let me come to the technology space. And obviously, I've been involved with digital transformation in Clavenes and later on in various spaces in some startups as well. I actually see a completely new way to monitor these risks, geopolitics, and others as well. Whether it's through geospatial technology, through AIS information, or through tracking a whole bunch of things. So it becomes more and more difficult to hide, as I call it. But more important, it's also easier to build analytics, trends, scenarios, and stuff like that. Do you actually see technology as being, and not just for your company if you're not involved in spot market, but do you see in general a lot more technology coming in space to manage the geopolitical challenges as well, in terms of where the ship is trading, what are the hot spots, where are the kind of key peak areas, maybe windows of opportunities, because every crisis also creates opportunities as well. How do you see technology as being a big part of this so-called mix of solutions going forward? It's always a bit of a Pandora's box, which people are not sure about.
Well, like I think technology is obviously going to play an increasing role. We have it in our own lives. We see how things are changing the way we operate and the way we function on a daily basis. The kind of telephones we use, the kind of connectivity we have on our mobile phones these days, and how that affects our ability to absorb information, to share information, to communicate. At the same time, it is interesting how little sometimes changes. And as you alluded to at the beginning, straight out of university, I joined Tufton, but right after Tufton, I started an internet business with a few other people in 1999, and we did this for 2 years, and there was a boom and a bust, and it was very interesting. But what we try to do is basically, optimize the way that the shipping market works in regards to fixing of cargoes and optimizing on how cargoes are, matched together, parcels, etc., etc. But realistically, you know, this is now 25 years ago. Very little has
Yep.
actually changed, and there's a lot of kind of optimization that is available. Just look at the chemical trade. If you were to put all the chemical parcels in the world into a system and then optimize it the way they're shipped around with vessels passing by and could pick up this parcel, that parcel, there would be so much more optimization possible, but it just doesn't work. Or they say maybe one day it's going to work. Maybe there's going to be one day an Uber system for shipping, and that could also be in the dry
Mm.
cargo space, for example, where also there's lots of smaller parcels that are shipped maybe on smaller vessels, where actually a larger vessel, passing by had empty space. But there's an imperfect market still. Now, this imperfect market is obviously being utilized for profits as well. But I'm actually sometimes amazed how over the 25 years since I started to bring technology into the shipping space, how little really has changed. And so, this technology, I wouldn't overrate it. Therefore, yes, of course, things will come, and there's going to be some winners, and there's going to be some fantastic stuff happening. Obviously, technology one is optimization around digitalization, and this dissemination of information and data. But the other is obviously technology, or new technologies in regards to fuel savings and other optimizations on the vessel, which is a very different field of technology. There, obviously, I see a lot happening. I think there is a lot of research there. There's a lot of capital being spent on research, and I think that part of the market I'm more enthusiastic about, that there will be new things, new technologies coming to the forefront that will have meaningful impacts on the way we may manage our vessels, the vessels are built, or also the designs of vessels in the future.
Absolutely. I agree with you. In fact, I was remembering Ship Desk when I was talking to one of or two of the technology providers in London to last week, 2 weeks back. And when they said that, we are looking to basically get the maximum accuracy of matching cargoes and ships, I said, well, that's something that you've been doing for many, many years. And that's, I would say, Ship Desk was probably a little bit ahead of its time in some ways, but the fundamental concept is, as you say, not very different from what you guys had at that point of time.
We're young and naive, and we thought we can change the world. And we were told, guys, go back to to the real world. But no, look, it was an interesting time, and I always encourage young people as well. I mean, we have younger students who come and have do internships now, etc. I always encourage them, go and try things out as well. And sometimes you don't know, you're young enough, if you fail you can pick yourself up, etc., and you take it as a great experience with you. But do go and give yourself I teach still at base now, base business school. I give a lecture
Yes, I
every
know.
year, and I also always encourage people, go out and try something sometimes.
Absolutely, and that brings me to the next question, which is exactly about that. You have always been encouraging the students. You've been lecturing, as you say, at Bays as well. But at the same time, you also have a lot of graduates from the course, the shipping trade and finance course, working with you. And the way I see it is that it takes an ecosystem to really start getting people interested and remain passionate about the industry. So it takes leaders, it takes circumstances, it takes experiences, the whole thing that needs to actually shape people's ideas about the industry. What are the kind of key attributes that you kind of look, or what kind of suggestions do you have for students that they should be focusing on in order to kind of prepare for the future of shipping going forward? What kind of advice do you have for the students? Because a lot of students listen to the podcast as well. Obviously, it's also pre-reading for most of the subjects that I teach. I actually ask them to listen to the podcast so they get some ideas from you guys as well as to what they can prepare for in future. So your thoughts on that, please. Yeah.
Well, the first question is obviously, are you interested in the shipping business or not? And you find quite often when you have young people who come as interns or otherwise, or apply for a job at our firm, there is some background there. There was an uncle, a father, or a cousin, or someone who was in shipping. Recently, we had a young guy here, and he was a law student, but his uncle was in shipping, and so he decided, why not? I come to London, I do an internship for a few months, and I learn about an industry I have no idea. He was growing up away from shipping, and he was very much looking forward to his law degree. And then after about 3 months or so of internship here, he was totally confused because, my God, this is such a fantastic industry. I'm no longer sure I want to do law. Maybe I want to do shipping. So it's obviously an industry that once you get to know it, it can be fascinating. It is also fascinating because it has all these different aspects of geopolitical events that do play a role. And quite often at dinner parties, you get asked, so, Christoph, does this Red Sea crisis has any effects on you or not? And you're like, my God, guys, it's massive. And so they completely misunderstand it. So that makes it quite interesting. It's a very interesting industry. Well, what would I say to young students? Look, I mean, it's an industry that has all these different aspects of trade, of geopolitical events, of investments, of huge amounts of capital that is required, of spot trading, long-term trading, etc., relationships. And my view is always don't specialize too early. Make sure you get a broad experience. And shipping, it's an international business. Go out and work in Asia, work in the US maybe, or so. I worked in Asia, I worked in the US before I came to London. I grew up in Germany, but go out in the world. Do spend some time. I would say today it's essential, much more than in my years, that you go to Asia and you spend some time in Asia. Do spend time in different roles in shipping. Don't just be specialized on one sector in shipping. You never know, and maybe you're interested in dry cargo, but do get some exposure in ship management. Do get some exposure maybe in a shipyard. Do go work for a bank. Do understand how banks look at this. Do understand the capital side of things, and so don't specialize too early. Make sure that you use your early years of your career to go slightly broader. And one thing I always say, because this is my godfather, he was a very successful ship owner, and he said to me once, he said, "Look, Christoph, never look at your salary until you're 30. Just look at
Right.
experience. Don't worry what you earn, because once you collect the experience, you will earn. And who cares if you have a big apartment when you're 27? You care about it when you're 40. And so, just look at the experience and focus on that, and get the international experience, etc. So that's what I'm enthusiastic about to tell young people. And I think once you have also if you want to be in a managerial position, then you have to obviously cater to lots of things. I mean, I have to deal day in, day out. I have to deal with investors. I have to deal with technical people who are coming with technical problems to us. I have to deal with charterers who come with requirements on cargoes or this or that. And so, once you're in a managerial, you also will have to make decisions on a vast amount of areas in shipping. And so make sure you try to at least have some broad understanding about these areas.
Absolutely. And that's great advice. One of the things that I tell my students is that remember, this is the only industry which is international by default and not by choice. In other companies, people end up saying, oh, we might get this person coming in who's from other countries. In this particular industry, you have to deal with the globe and the world, whether you like it or not, because it has a global character internally ingested into it directly. So I think it's a fantastic space to be in, and you are a great ambassador for the industry. I think we are out of time now, Christoph, but I can only say thank you so very much again. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and I'm sure we'll continue to talk at various situations and levels. But it's always great to have your frank opinions, and thank you for sharing, which was very frank and very candid. Thanks a lot.
Great talking to you, Punit.
That's all we have time for today, and we look forward to joining you on the next episode of the Seatrade Maritime Podcast.